When a massive 18-wheeler barrels down the highway, you trust the driver is operating on a universal code. Safety.
Mm-hmm.
But recent federal action suggests that trust, well, it may have been misplaced.
It's a huge issue.
We're talking about a dramatic crackdown that reveals thousands of commercial licenses were issued to drivers who may be unqualified, a potential risk to every single commuter on America's roads.
That is the intense, multi-layered conflict we're really diving into today. Our mission is to unpack these executive orders, the intense federal enforcement actions.
All targeting English proficiency and licensing for commercial truck drivers.
Exactly.
And look, this isn't some theoretical policy debate. It's driven by tragedy.
It is.
The trucking industry is, the backbone of the American economy.
Yeah.
It's responsible for moving something like 11.27 billion tons of freight in 2024.
A staggering number.
But the Department of Transportation is now claiming that previous safety standards were dangerously lax, especially when it comes to the basic ability to communicate.
And the immediate catalyst for all this was, well, it was devastating. A fatal crash in Florida back in August 2025.
I remember that.
A foreign driver allegedly made an illegal U-turn, and it resulted in the deaths of 3 people.
Right. And after that, the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, issued a really stark warning. He said non-compliant foreign drivers are endangering American lives.
He did. He argued that the prior guidance on enforcement was just. It was simply too weak.
And the immediate impact of this new policy is pretty stunning proof that, well, that enforcement was needed.
Numbers don't lie.
Since the rules took effect in late June 2025, federal data shows that more than 9,500 drivers have already been pulled off the road.
More than 9,500 nationwide, just for failing the new roadside English proficiency test.
That is undeniable evidence of, widespread non-compliance under the old system, right?
It certainly points that way. But the immediate question for the industry and for you, the consumer, is what's the trade-off?
The costly trade-off.
Exactly. What is the cost of fixing this loophole so quickly? Because this massive enforcement operation is, at the same time, ripping a huge hole in the labor supply. And we'll get into that.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Proponents of this crackdown argue this isn't about creating new rules, but about, finally enforcing existing ones.
That's absolutely right. And that's key. We aren't talking about a new opinion here. We're talking about an existing statute.
Which one specifically?
It's Federal Law 49 CFR 391.11b2. This law has been on the books for a long time.
And it mandates what, exactly?
It says a commercial driver must read and speak the English language sufficiently to converse with the public, understand traffic signs, respond to official inquiries, and, fill out the required reports.
So, if the law has always been there, why the crisis now? What changed?
Well, the government's position is that previous administrations, especially back in 2016, issued what they call weak guidance.
Weak guidance.
Basically, it excused or minimized enforcement of this proficiency standard. The new administration looked at that and saw a dangerous regulatory failure.
And their response was the April 2025 executive order.
The one forcefully titled, Enforcing Common Sense Rules of the Road for America's Truck Drivers. And it explicitly rescinded that old guidance.
And the order made it crystal clear. English proficiency is now being treated as a non-negotiable safety requirement.
Non-negotiable.
So here's where it gets really interesting. What specific safety scenarios are driving this whole argument?
So the safety proponents are very, very clear on this. They say English is critical because a lot of these complex life-saving highway warnings, they aren't symbols.
You actually have to read them.
You have to read and understand signs that say chains required, or those temporary digital warnings like ice forms on bridge.
Or the really critical instructions for runaway truck ramp warnings.
Exactly. If you miss or misunderstand just one of those, the consequence, it can be fatal.
And the administration is using tragic examples to drive this point home. They keep citing the 2019 I-70 crash, where a trucker reportedly failed to understand steep grade signs and warnings for runaway ramps, and people died. It highlights a very real, a very visceral danger.
It does. Now, critics will argue that correlation isn't causation, but the administration is using these anecdotes to bolster their argument that, universal linguistic competence must be the baseline.
And it's not just about reading signs, is it?
No, not at all. The other huge safety factor is emergency communication. Drivers have to be able to interact seamlessly with law enforcement, with traffic officers, border patrol.
Citation personnel.
Right, during an inspection or, God forbid, an accident. You just can't wait for an interpreter when you're dealing with something like a hazardous material spill.
Now, it's important to note this isn't facing universal opposition. We're seeing major industry groups actually support this change.
And that's a crucial alignment. Groups like the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, OIDA, they strongly support the decision.
And what's their reasoning?
They argue that basic English skills are essential for reading those signs that save lives. Simple as that. The Arkansas Trucking Association also publicly backed consistent federal enforcement.
So that really reinforces the administration's argument that this is about maintaining professional safety standards for everyone?
It does.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. How does this new mandate actually work when a driver is pulled over? How do officers determine proficiency?
The process is now standardized, and it's immediate. The new guidance revised the out-of-service criteria. So if an officer reasonably suspects a driver can't communicate safely in English.
Maybe they're having trouble answering simple questions during an inspection.
Exactly. Then they administer a two-part English language proficiency assessment.
Okay, walk us through that assessment. What does it involve?
So part one is just basic conversational ability. The driver has to answer the officer's questions in English without any help, no translator, no device.
Questions like,
what is your destination? Or when was your last break? Basic operational questions. Then part two is recognition. The driver has to correctly identify and explain the meaning of at least 3 out of 4 common traffic signs.
and if they fail, either part.
They're immediately placed out of service. They cannot drive that rig 1 more mile.
And that brings us back to the scope of this. We mentioned the 9,500 drivers pulled off the road since late June.
That number just suggests the scale of noncompliance under the old system was enormous.
Yeah.
But the executive action went even further than language.
Right. It also targeted the issuance of certain licenses, creating an even bigger enforcement net.
Correct. The administration instructed the DOT to review how states issue commercial driver's licenses, or CDLs, with a specific focus on non-domiciled CDLs.
For anyone who doesn't know, what are those?
These are licenses issued to foreign nationals who are legally residing here but aren't U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents.
And the policy got really aggressive here.
It did. The DOT issued an emergency rule restricting licenses for that exact group. It bars legally present individuals, we're talking asylees, DACA recipients, refugees, from renewing or upgrading their commercial licenses.
Regardless of their safety record.
Regardless. It immediately put their careers in jeopardy.
And the federal government is using its leverage to make sure this happens.
Big time. States that fail to enforce these new rules risk losing substantial federal funding, specifically from the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program.
Take California, for instance. Our sources say the state risks losing a staggering $33 million.
$33 million. And as a result, they're reportedly moving to revoke 17,000 licenses just to comply with that federal pressure.
Wow. So the administration clearly sees a uniform national standard as overriding any state-level leniency. Consequences be damned.
And those consequences are, well, they're economic. We have to talk about the impact of removing thousands of drivers immediately.
Especially because this is all happening right in the middle of a major U.S. truck driver shortage.
Exactly. The industry was already in a crisis in 2025. It was short somewhere between 60 and 80,000 drivers.
And the workforce is getting older, right? The average age is around 47.
It is. So new labor is absolutely critical. And historically, foreign-born drivers have been essential in filling that gap.
They make up about 18% of the U.S. truck driver population.
Right. And their numbers more than doubled between 2000 and 2021. They often fill the most demanding long-haul jobs.
So the industry is warning that if you simultaneously remove experienced drivers and cut off the pipeline of new ones, you have a recipe for economic disaster.
And that pipeline has been severed. In August 2025, the State Department announced a pause on new employment visas specifically for commercial truck drivers.
So it's a freeze on new foreign recruits.
It freezes nearly all legal pathways for them to enter the country to drive.
The projections for the potential labor loss here are just staggering. One freight CEO projected that as many as 400,000 drivers could leave the business.
400,000. That's roughly 11% of the total national driving supply.
Put that number in perspective for us.
Okay, losing 400,000 drivers is like wiping out the entire population of Miami from the supply chain workforce.
And this hits small businesses the hardest.
Absolutely. The trucking industry is dominated by small carriers. 92% of them operate 10 or fewer trucks.
So when one of their drivers is placed out of service...
It's a costly and frustrating disruption. They have to book flights and rentals to go get abandoned rigs. Their insurance costs go up. It's a nightmare.
And that financial ripple effect, it goes far beyond carriers.
Of course, fewer drivers mean higher transportation costs. That guarantees an increase in supply chain bottlenecks, and it keeps pushing inflation up, especially since trucks transport over 70% of all goods in the U.S.
So the debate boils down to whether the safety benefit is worth this immense economic shock.
And that's the tension. Proponents say safety is non-negotiable. Critics raise some very serious empirical questions about the whole premise of the enforcement.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting for me. Critics argue this crackdown is arbitrary because it reverses a previous standard without, sufficient new evidence.
Exactly. They point out that the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, or CVSA, removed limited English ability as an out-of-service factor all the way back in 2015.
So why did they remove it?
Because they found, and I'm quoting here, no evidence it created an imminent crash risk.
Wait. So the previous regulator explicitly said this wasn't an imminent safety threat just a decade ago.
That's right. And opponents argue the administration has reversed this based on a few high-profile tragic anecdotes rather than new data proving a consistent link.
That seems like a core weakness for any legal challenge to this policy.
It is. On top of that, there's a huge concern about enforcement discretion.
The officer on the side of the road making the call.
Right. Critics worry this gives officers broad discretion, which could lead to bias or profiling based on accents, even if the driver is perfectly capable of understanding operational English.
And that fear is having real-world consequences right now. Our sources say drivers are feeling tremendous confusion, anxiety, and fear.
To the point where some foreign-born drivers are actually refusing to travel to southern states because of the heightened enforcement there.
This brings up a critical question. Are we testing for full conversational fluency or just the technical English needed for the job?
That's the heart of the critics' argument. They say most road signs are visual and symbolic. They require basic literacy, not academic fluency. They argue that things like licensing status and proper vehicle maintenance are way more relevant factors in preventing accidents.
But nevertheless, the administration's core argument holds firm. Operating a commercial vehicle is a privilege. That privilege demands the highest level of safety competence,
including the ability to communicate immediately in the national language during any emergency.
So we circle back to that core tension. The undeniable safety imperative citing fatal accidents versus the massive and immediate economic necessity of maintaining the labor pipeline that keeps our economy moving.
So what does this all mean for the future of American trucking? And, for you as a consumer waiting for goods?
That's the final question.
If the goal is truly safety, does the answer lie in this strict, immediate removal of experienced workers? Or, as some industry leaders have proposed, would federally funded, mandatory English training programs for certified drivers be a more effective way to both enhance safety and stabilize this workforce? That's the balance policymakers have to resolve, and the outcome will affect every single purchase you make.